Joining me now is North Dakota Senator Kevin Cramer. He's a member of the Senate Banking, Armed Services, Veterans Affairs, and Environment and Public Works Committee. Senator, it's good to see you. Thanks very much. I know you were at the hearing yesterday. What did you learn? Any takeaways from your standpoint?
Well, I think my main takeaway, Maria, was that the knee-jerk reaction over that weekend was a little greater than it needed to be. It was successful in the sense that it held back some of the contagion. I still believe it was somewhat unnecessary, that there are other ways that it could have been done. But my biggest takeaway was probably, in fact, in that clip that you just played, it sort of says it all, that while the regulators are correct as far as they go, where they don't go is what culpability do the regulators themselves have. In other words, publicly warning, as Mr. Barr said, the bad management of the bank is fine as far as it goes. But I was a soccer referee, and unless you blow the whistle hard, put up a yellow card every now and then or a red card every now and then, without enforcement action, warnings are just sort of casually given and sometimes casually received. Yeah. So I think they went as far as they went. They were right for the most part, but they should have gone further, and I think we will ultimately.
Yeah, great analogy. That's what my next question is: how far will you go? Coming out of that hearing, what do you think happens in terms of bills brought to the floor, potential regulation? Are we going to get stiffer rules for the mid-sized banks?
Yeah, so there's certainly going to be an attempt to do that, and clearly there are some zealots both on the committee and off of the committee that would like to restore what they consider to be the good old days of Dodd-Frank in its entirety. But I don't see the support for that, Maria. There'll be rhetoric, there'll be bills introduced. I just don't see the support, even on the committee, quite honestly, in this narrowly divided Senate and narrowly divided government. So there'll be a lot of screaming and hollering. But even these witnesses yesterday don't seem to be advocating for a lot more regulation. Remember, the regulations were not the problem here. The regulator, if anybody, was the problem, was the regulator. Because even under the current rules, the lack of good risk management with idiosyncratic risk or more localized risk was not appropriate and wasn't adequate. So I don't know how adding more rules to people who break the rules really helps.
Yeah, I think that's what the consensus has been here this morning. We've been talking about the hearings. We're also talking about China. And you questioned Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin yesterday as well about China and these companies that are owned by the Communist Party, and they are trying to buy farmland in the United States near our military bases. Let's take a listen. Watch.
Are we giving adequate cover and information and coaching, perhaps, to other communities around the country?
We have to be vigilant about what's going on outside of our fences. We got to work with the communities to make sure that we do have some kind of situational awareness, and we have to advocate for the protection of our bases and installations.
Senator, what was he saying there? I mean, the governors have been much more adamant. The governors are saying off limits. Look at Kristi Noem in the Dakotas. Look at Glenn Youngkin in Virginia. Look at Texas. They will not allow CCP companies to acquire land. Is that what the Defense Secretary was saying? I wasn't following what his recommendation is.
Sure. So when he was saying we, what he's talking about the Department of Defense, because in the situation in Grand Forks, North Dakota, with Fufang purchasing some acreage within 12 miles of a reconnaissance wing of the United States Air Force, the Department of Defense and the Department of the Air Force was very late to sound the alarm. In fact, local citizens sounded the alarm originally. And what I was questioning him about is, shouldn't the Department of Defense speak up sooner and be a little bolder? And my whole point was, let's not let what happened to Grand Forks over the course of the last year plus. Let's not let that happen anywhere else. Speak up sooner. So I think he was acknowledging that, Maria, but I was hoping for a little more, quite honestly.
Because we all know that the tone is set at the top. And the Biden administration has had an incredibly soft approach on China. Kayleigh, jump in here.
Yeah, Senator, Vice President Kamala Harris is in Africa this week, theoretically, to counter China's influence on that continent. We know China has been investing into African land and resources. Why are we not seeing that same coordination towards China's efforts to buy up U.S. land? Why does this administration seem so less concerned about what's happening on our own soil?
Yeah, great point, Kaylee, because while I applaud the Vice President's attempt, and we'll see what comes of it, and I think we all have to have a greater awareness of China's malign influence, not just in the United States, but around the world, but we should start in the United States,
right,
where their influence is very dramatic. And I think certainly the House committee that Representative Gallagher heads up on China is a very good step, and kudos to Kevin McCarthy and the new leadership over there for setting that up. And the decoupling from China, a term maybe I even use a little bit too liberally in some senses, but it's going to be hard to unwind a lot of things, but we ought to at least stop where we are,
yeah,
and then see where we can go from there, so we're not so reliant for a lot of things, including critical minerals and pharmaceuticals and food, and not reliant, that critical supply chain reliant on China. With regard to Africa, however, I do think we, again, even some of us more conservative people need to look at the vacancies in the world and how China swoops in with their very low standards and poor values and influences those areas. So I think it's an all of the above, but let's start at home first.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And we've seen the CCP use that approach in a number of countries. It's true they're doing it in Africa right now. But look, you just mentioned real estate and what's going on in terms of work. There is distress in office market, and the Journal this morning is writing that it's going to spread to high-end buildings, and we're waiting to see how this economy slows down and whether or not the Fed is going to be able to have this soft landing. But there's also an issue around oil. The Saudis say that they are okay paying and transacting with China in the Chinese yuan. A judge has now ordered the Biden administration to resume oil and gas lease sales on public lands in North Dakota. Senator, your state, tell us about this. What's the impact?
Yeah, so North Dakota is not a big federal land state, but the Bakken, the heart of the Bakken, actually is on federal land, and certainly some very significant Native American lands. And what's happened is, going all the way back to Joe Biden himself doing that moratorium on federal leases, since that time, there's only been one required quarterly lease over the course of over 2 years in North Dakota on the federal lands. And Judge Traynor made it very clear to the BLM that not only are they in violation of the law, but they have to resume those leases on a regular basis, and that this is not like a suggestion. This law is mandatory.
Yeah.
And somehow this administration just does what they want to do and doesn't do what they're supposed to do, regardless of what the law says. And he slapped them down pretty hard.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen this over and over again, where the president comes out with things that are clearly unconstitutional, but he pushes it and pushes it as far as he can push it. And he's done this, yeah.
He's done it many times. And energy development, Maria, as you know, is one of those geopolitical tools that we can use where we don't need weapons of war.
That's right.
And instead of weakening our country, let's empower those producers, both on federal lands and private and state lands.
Senator, it's great to have you this morning. Good to see you, sir. Thank you.
Good to be with you.
Kevin Cramer is in D.C.